Look at you, look at me, happy as we could be. I'll take a picture on my phone, so I will never be alone. So don't forget to say cheese on the count of 3 when I take a selfie. When I take a selfie, I snap a moment in time, I post it up online for all the world to see, and everyone can agree. No need for scenery, photogenic you and me in my selfie. When I take a selfie, so close to home or far away, or having fun on holiday.
Well, today's part 3 of our series, Me, My, Selfie, and I. If you're just joining us in this series, I want to get you up to speed in just a second. Before I do, I've got a question for all of you as we get started. Has there ever been an area of your life, or maybe your entire life, that is in such disarray that you're not exactly sure if it can be fully put back together again? Has there ever been a relationship, an area with your health or your finances where things are such a mess that while you wanted to rebuild that part of your life, as you wanted to rebuild it, you weren't sure that was even possible? Have you ever had the relationship that was so broken that while you wanted to mend it, while you wanted to fix it, you weren't sure it was ever possible for this relationship to be put back together again? What do you do in those situations when this looks impossible for you to accomplish? And what do you do in those situations when the mess that is going on in your life is at least partially your fault? I'm not saying it's all your fault. There are other people involved. There were uncontrollable scenarios involved, but to some degree, you're to blame for the mess your life is in. Not 100%, maybe not even 50%, but to some degree, you've contributed to your problem. What do you do when you've made a mess and you were the one who had too much to drink? When you were the one who said the hurtful words or called the names? Well, what do you do when you were the one who told the lie to cover up what was going on? What do you do when you were the one who got pulled over? What do you do when you were the one who ended the marriage? What do you do when you were the one who lost your temper and you were screaming? What do you do when you were the one who outspent your income and created your mess? What do you do when your life is a mess and you're not sure it can be rebuilt and you're at least partially to blame for the mess? Well, in my experience as a pastor, you're probably going to do one of 3 things. At least these are the things most people do. We either blame God, blame someone else, or we blame ourselves. You blame God. Where are you, God? I thought you loved me. I thought you cared about me. I thought you would be with me. I thought you would bless me. If you were a good God, you wouldn't let bad things like this happen to me. Is it that you're not good, or is that you're not powerful enough to intervene? Which is it? Some people, when life is a mess, and they're partially to blame, they put the blame on God's doorstep. Say, God, this is your fault. Some people choose to blame someone else. It was my parents. It was the way they raised me. It was their dysfunction at home. It was my boss. It was the way my wife yelled at me. It was the things he said to me. It was what she did with our money. We just blame someone. Even though I'm partially to blame, we blame someone else when life is a mess. But some of you, you just blame yourself. If you're at least partially to blame, you blame yourself. You ruminate on your mistakes. You beat yourself up because you feel guilty, because you feel awful. You say, this is my fault. I'm an idiot. What have I done? I'm so stupid. And you blame yourself for what's going on. In fact, some of you are so caught up in blaming yourself that when you start looking at how you might rebuild your life, even though you want it rebuilt, you take so much responsibility for the mess and you feel so guilty about it, you factored God out of the rebuilding project. Because whatever you believe about God, you knew that was against God's will what you did, or at least it was against your conscience. So you think, I made this mess, I don't think God is really interested in helping me dig my way out of it because I made it, it's my fault, and you just factor God out of the rebuilding project. We blame God, we blame someone else, or we blame ourselves. Well, this is the situation we find our friend Jacob in today. This series, me, my Selfie, and I, we're following the life story of a man who lived several centuries ago. His name was Jacob. The big idea of this series is that in all of our lives, there's a real you and there's a selfie you. There's the selfie you, which is always happy, always smiling, always sexy, always on vacation. And then there's a real you, which struggles and has sorrows and sometimes is bored at long afternoons at work and sometimes wants to rip your hair out raising children. There's real you and there's selfie you. There's a gap. And anytime we have a gap in our lives, that gap is usually filled with frustration, with tension, with anxiety, and with guilt. That's what we're talking about in this series, the gap between real you and selfie you and how to close that gap. Well, today, we're talking about the gap that happens when you've made a mess of your life. Again, maybe not entirely, but it's partially your fault. Because that's where we find our friend Jacob today. And I love going through the life of Jacob with you guys because the more I study about his life, the more I relate to him. Because when you read about someone in the Bible, you would expect that if it's a Bible hero, this would be someone who's put together, who's obeying God, who's doing the right things, and that's not Jacob at all. Jacob is just jacked up. He is so flawed. His life is such a mess. It's in such disarray. He's never doing the right thing. He's never obeying God properly. And I feel better about myself reading about Jacob, and this guy made the Bible. Maybe there's hope for me. But you read about him, he's so relatable to us in our lives today because he's not a great hero of faith. He's such a flawed individual. And today he's in a situation where his life is an absolute mess. If you missed last week, what happened was Jacob deceived his elderly blind father, Isaac, and tricked him into giving him the blessing instead of his older brother, Esau. And the reason why that was important is because as you get this birthright and as you get this blessing, you become the legal representative of the family. You get the lion's share of your father's estate when he dies. You become the head of the tribe. And in this case, because it's Abraham's family, you become part of the family line of Jesus. And when people around the world gather every Christmas to tell the Christmas story, you get to be part of that story. But he deceived Isaac into giving him that blessing. And when Esau found out, his brother Esau, he was furious and wanted to kill him. Jacob's made a mess of things. Today, what we're going to see is that although Jacob believed in God, his belief in God did not equip him, let me say this again, look at me, his belief in God did not equip him to deal with the mess he made in his life. His doctrinal stance and convictions about God did not equip him to deal with the mess he made in his life. And it was not until he encountered God that things began to change in the life of Jacob. So we're going to pick up the story right where we left off last week, where Esau is angry, Jacob's afraid, and the mom, Rebekah, is going to help try and fix this situation. When Rebekah was told what her older son Esau had said, and what he said was, "Out of respect for my father, I'm going to wait for him to die before I murder my brother." He was a nice young boy. He's very respectful to his elders. She sent for her younger son Jacob and said to him, "Your brother Esau is planning to avenge himself by killing you. Now then, my son, do what I say. Flee at once to my brother Laban in Haran. Stay with him for a while until your brother's fury subsides." Now, she was not from around here. Isaac and his father Abraham were from the borders of modern-day Israel, but she was not. She came from a place called Haran, which was about 500 miles away across the desert. She had a brother, Laban. She says, "Jacob, you have an uncle Laban. I know you've never met him, but you need to go meet him now because your brother Esau wants to kill you to death. He's serious. Run away. Stay with him. After Esau gets over it, it'll pass over. He'll chill out. Then I'll send a messenger, and you can come home." He continues, "When your brother is no longer angry with you and forgets what you did to him," because that's totally going to happen. Wait. Why am I mad at Jacob again? Yeah, totally. "I'll send word for you to come back from there. Why should I lose both of you in one day?" So she comes up with this plot. "I'm going to send you away. I'll give you a cover story." Then Rebekah said to Isaac, her husband, the elderly father of Jacob, I'm disgusted with living because of these Hittite women. If Jacob takes a wife from among the women of this land, from Hittite women like these, my life will not be worth living. Okay, so this is Rebecca. She's a drama mama. That's how she raises her kids. Ladies, 2 things here for you. Don't be a drama mama. If you have kids, lay off the drama. And the second thing is this. She is going to convince her husband Isaac to send Jacob away in order that he's not killed by Esau, but no one wants to tell Isaac, oh yeah, your 2 boys hate each other and one wants to kill the other. So she comes up with this excuse. He needs to go find a nice girl to marry. I want to send him back to where I'm from and to my hometown so that he can find a nice girl to marry. And she nags him until he does it. Now, ladies, here's your second lesson. The second lesson is, if you want your husband to do something, if you nag him enough, he will do it. And he will resent you for it. I don't think Isaac and Rebekah are exactly the model relationship you want to model your relationship after, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, if you read the Bible, you're like, I want to work on my marriage. I need a good example of someone who's married in the Bible. Nope, keep turning the pages because there just aren't a lot of examples of people who have happy marriages in the Bible. That's what I love about Scripture when you read it. The Bible is more realistic about how hard it is to be single than any other piece of literature. It's also more realistic about how hard it is to be married than any other piece of literature. It's so real with the complexities and challenges of real life. So if this is like, say, so if ladies, if you want to nag like Rebecca, that's kind of like, dudes going to your guy friend who's in a marriage and he's miserable. I mean, just miserable. And you're like, hey man, how's it going? Every night I pray for death, Well, I want a marriage like yours. Would you tell me how you got to that place in your relationship? That's going to be, you don't ask that dude for advice. Ladies, if you want a family like Rebecca's family, then do what Rebecca did. She nags her husband, and you'll get his behavior, you'll also get his regret, and they just have this dysfunctional marriage. That's who they are. So what happens is Isaac calls in Jacob. He says, all right, your mama wants you to go find a nice girl to marry. So Isaac blesses Jacob and sends him away 500 miles across the desert to go find a nice wife to bring back home. He's unaware of all this family dysfunction, or Esau wants to kill Jacob. So here's what happened. Jacob left Beersheba, that was their home camp, and set out for Haran. When he reached a certain place, he stopped for the night because the sun had set. Now, if you've been tracking with us during this series, I hope you appreciate what a brilliant storyteller the narrator is. Because with incredible economy of words, he paints these vivid pictures of what's going on in the lives and hearts and thoughts of all the subjects in his story. So Jacob leaves home, and he gets to a certain place. And the narrator calls it a certain place, although it had a name. We learn it later. It doesn't even matter. It's the middle of nowhere. It's not an important place. There's no bridge. There's no pass. There's no city. There's no trade center. He's just in the middle of nowhere. This is like when you're driving in northern Wisconsin, and there's a sign that says there's a town here, and it mentions it's unincorporated, and you pass 3 houses, and you're like, where's the town? That was it. It was those 3 houses. He doesn't stop because he reached his destination. He doesn't stop because he reached somewhere important. Why did he stop? The sun set. Can't walk any further. Guess I'll stop here. Now, both literally and metaphorically, the sun had set on Jacob. And heaven was dark to him. In fact, here's how bad off he was. Check this out. Taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep. How hard up do you have to be to say, that stone looks like a good pillow tonight, right? What's the narrator saying? He's so broke. He's so lonely. He's so all alone. Seriously, if you had anything to use for a pillow, a cloak, some socks, pair of underwear, anything is better than a rock for a pillow. He's penniless. He was given the birthright, the lion's share of his father's estate. He was given the blessing, the legal representative of the clan. And he's broke. He's all alone. He's the head of the clan. He doesn't even have a clan. He's got nobody, and he's stranded in the middle of nowhere, and now the sun has set. And he's so exhausted, he can actually use a stone for a pillow and fall asleep. Now, Jacob's life is a mess. How is he going to respond to this? How could he respond? There's a number of ways he could respond. He could respond by blaming God. Because before he was born, his mother Rebecca inquired of God, why is this crazy business happening inside my belly? Finds out there's two nations at war within your womb. You're going to give womb. You're going to give birth to twin boys. They're going to be in struggle with each other their whole lives. But the older one is going to serve the younger one. Jacob was the younger one. He could have said, God, what about this prophecy you made about my life? What about this prophecy you made about my life that I would be served by my brother and things would be great for me? God, things are not great for me. In fact, everything you seem to promise to me, it is not coming true, and you are very far away from me. He could blame God for what's going on in his life. He could blame someone else for what's going on in his life, couldn't he? My brother Esau, he's been wrestling with me since the day I was born. He's been trying to keep me down since the day I was born. It's my father, Isaac. It's his problem. He never loved me. He never cared about me. All he could do was say how awesome Esau was, and look at this new buck that Esau brought home from hunting, and look at all these amazing things Esau is doing, but he doesn't love me at all. It's my dad's fault. Actually, it's my mom's fault. This whole scheme was her idea. She's the one who said, go get a goat, dress up like Esau, and go deceive your blind father. This was not my idea. I got dragged into this, and now I'm suffering all the consequences for her idea. He could have blamed someone else for his life being a mess. Could have blamed himself. Stupid, I'm an idiot. Why did I think this would be a good idea to lie to my father in God's name and call down an oath and say, no, God's blessing me. I'm Esau. He blessed me with this trophy from the field for you to eat. Go eat, Dad. It's going to be good. Why? This is my fault. I did this. He could be beating himself up and ruminating on his mistakes and failures and deception. What's interesting, however, is how ambivalent Jacob is towards God at this moment. Some of you, when your life hits the bottom, you start praying to God like you've never prayed to God before. Like, hey God, I don't know if you remember me. I used to go to church. Things are a mess right now. I need your help. Hello up there, anyone? Anyone? You just start praying. Jacob is totally ambivalent towards God. He's not praying to God for help. He's not crying out against God in anger. He seems to have completely factored God right out of this life rebuilding equation of his. He's going to have to figure out how to do it all by himself. The reason why that's interesting is because when Jacob grew up, he was taught to believe in God. And it certainly seems he believed in God. When he was 15 years old when his grandfather Abraham died, so as a young boy, he would have remembered sitting on his grandfather Abraham's lap and Abraham telling him about all his adventures with God, how Abraham walked with God, how Abraham talked with God, how God showed up visibly and Abraham encountered God. And then you have his father Isaac, who also had an encounter with God. He didn't just believe in God, he met God. And then you have Jacob. He's never encountered God. He's never met God. He just has this vague belief about God. But God's going to show up and change everything. And when we see this, we learn in our own lives how to begin to rebuild from a mess that you're at least partially responsible for. But the solution does not come from blaming God, blaming someone else, or blaming yourself. Let's see what happened. He had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth, with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. So get this picture in your mind. There's this massive staircase. It's so big that the bottom of it is on the earth, the top of it is in heaven, and there are perhaps hundreds or thousands of angels ascending the staircase and descending the staircase. What's the purpose of this vision? What he's seeing is a behind the physical world scene at what's going on in the universe. That sovereign God in heaven is sending his angels, who are his servants, into the world with executive orders and with royal decrees. And they go out and they say, "Yes, sir," and they obey the will of the Father. They execute his orders, and then they return back to heaven and say, "What else do you have for us today, sir?" And he executes more orders. And they go out and they carry it out, and they come back, and he sees that God is at work, even though Jacob in his life does not see God working. Although heaven seems closed up to him, although heaven seems dark to him, he gets this sneak peek behind the scenes, and he sees that God is doing something, his purposes and his will in the world. And that's not all. There above it, above the staircase, stood the Lord, and he said, "I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham, and the God of Isaac." I am the Lord. And the word he uses here in the Hebrew language is God's special name. There's two words for the Lord in Hebrew that English translates as Lord. One word just means master, like the guy in charge. This is God's name. It literally means, if you translate it from Hebrew, I am. He says, "Jacob, I am. I am. I am magnificent. I am glorious. I am holy. I am exalted. I am gracious. I am." Okay? I'm the Lord. And I am the God of Abraham. And I'm the God of Isaac. See, Jacob, here's what you lose sight of in your life. You get so wrapped up in your deal. You get so caught up in your deal and in your interest and getting your way and your agenda that you're tricking people, you're lying, you're deceiving. You're so caught up in your deal, Jacob, you need to zoom out, buddy. I'm not about your deal. I've been God a lot longer than you've been around. And in the life of your grandfather Abraham, I was at work. In the life of your father Isaac, I was at work. And I'm going to be at work in your life. I'm going to be working for a long time after you. Because God, listen to me, God is not primarily concerned about your happy circumstances. God's primary concern is not about you having happy circumstances. God's primary concern is about His glory and His name and His renown. Because if God was primarily concerned about you having happy circumstances, then God would be an idolater because He's worshiping you. And that would not be a good God. God is concerned about His glory because there is no one greater. And we become idolaters when we get mad at God because my circumstances aren't happy, even though I'm partially to blame. He says, Jacob, you need to zoom out, buddy. You need to zoom out and see the big picture. I've been working for my glory in the life of Abraham. I've been working for my glory in the life of Isaac. I'm going to do it in your generation, and I'm going to keep doing it after you. I'm the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. He continues. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the east, or to the west and to the east, to the north and to south. What he's doing is he's repeating the blessing that he gave to Abraham. Last summer I preached about this in the life of Abraham. We looked at that in the series called, he said to Abraham, I'm going to give you this land, and your descendants are going to be so numerous, they're going to be like dust on the earth. They're going to be everywhere. And he says, all peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. What he's saying is, you are part of this messianic chain. You get to be part of the messianic story. Abraham was, Isaac was, you are, and one of your sons will be too. You're going to be part of the family tree of Jesus. He just makes that promise. I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. God shows up and He makes a covenantal promise of His grace to someone who has not earned it and to someone who does not deserve it. Here's what we learn. If you're taking notes, you can fill in these blanks. God can show up in an unexpected place. God can show up to an unexpected person. God can show up in an unexpected place. God can show up to an unexpected person. He shows up in an unexpected place, in the middle of nowhere, when Jacob's life is at the lowest low, when he caused the mess, and when everything is crumbling around him, God shows up in an unexpected place. And he shows up to an unexpected person, not a moral person, not a good person, a person whose name means deceiver, and he's been lying his way through life, he's been spinning his way through life, he's been deceiving his way through life, and God says, perfect, I'm going to bless you. And he makes not a contract, but a covenant with Jacob. And you need to know the difference. I preach on this once in a while. A contract is when two parties come together and they say, here are the terms for each side of this agreement. If you keep your half, we'll keep our half. If we keep our half, you keep your half. But if you don't keep your half, we don't keep our half. I will if you will, but if you don't, I won't. That's a contract. God does not show up to Jacob and says, if you start to get your act together, and if you start to become a good, moral, respectable person, and if you start worshiping me, and if you start obeying me, then I will bless you and be with you. He does not make a contract. What does he make instead? A covenant. And a covenant says, I will, period. I will bless you. I will watch over you wherever and whatever, and I will bring you back. And you will not be alone. I will not leave you. I will not forsake you. Jacob doesn't deserve it. Jacob's going to blow it again. And God says, but I didn't make a contract with Jacob. I made a covenant with Jacob, where I obligated myself to bless him because of who I am, not because of who he is. God can show up in an unexpected place. God can show up to an unexpected person. And this floors Jacob. Look at his response. When Jacob awoke from his sleep, he thought, surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. He was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? Surely the Lord was in this place, and I was not aware of it. Friends, I'm just going to throw this out there. Could it be those of you who are going through a low season, that God is with you in that season and you are not aware of it? Because God shows up in unexpected places and to unexpected people. Could it be that you've made a mess of something in your life and you've factored God out of the equation, not realizing that God might be in that place and you are not aware of it? Because God shows up in unexpected places to unexpected people, people who do not deserve it, people who made the messes in their own lives. God wants to show up in that place. Are you aware when you walked in here today that God is in this place? Are you aware of his presence, of his blessing, of his love, of his covenant love and mercy for you? Jacob suddenly realizes God is with me even here. I wasn't even aware of it. And he was afraid. I'll get to that in a second, why he's afraid, but he's afraid, and he says, how awesome is this place? Continues. This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. Now, the narrator, zoom out for a minute, the narrator is showing us something that we don't know because we haven't been tracking with him through the whole Genesis storyline, but he's cluing the reader into something else that's already happened in Genesis. The gate of heaven is a Hebrew term that showed up in Genesis chapter 11. And the word is Babel, from which we get the derivative name Babylon, the ancient city. What happened in Genesis chapter 11 is that a group of people got together and they said, let's make a reputation for ourselves. Let's build a name for ourselves. Let's build a city, huge city. And then we're going to build a tower with a staircase that reaches up to heaven. Now, when I was a kid, I would envision this because I heard about this story, the Tower of Babel. I envisioned this cylindrical tower going up to the sky with a staircase kind of winding its way around it. But in ancient cultures, they actually had temples with stairways that went up to heaven. They were called ziggurats. If you want to know what a ziggurat is, imagine if you have an Egyptian pyramid in Minecraft. That's what a ziggurat is, just stepped all the way up like that. It's like 8-bit graphics is what a ziggurat was. They didn't have better graphics back then in ancient times. And up one side of a ziggurat, there was a staircase. And the reason why ancient civilizations built ziggurats with staircases is because they would put a shrine to an idol at the top of the staircase. And they would build ziggurats in cities, in densely populated areas where the most people were, where the most important people were, where the wealthiest people were. And the purpose was for the people to gather at the base of this ziggurat, at the base of this stairway going up to the gods. And they would go there and they would atone for their sins. And they would pray for the gods to bless them. And it's where man would meet and rise up and climb the staircase to God or the gods. And Jacob suddenly sees something that completely turns this idea on its head. He has a dream of a staircase, but the staircase was not built where humans would build a staircase to heaven. It was built in the middle of nowhere. And it was not built for people to ascend to God to seek His blessing. God built this staircase, and it came not from earth to heaven, but from heaven to earth. And the Lord showed up at this staircase and stood over Jacob and had unconditional promises for him. Every other religion says we have to build a stairway into heaven. We have to build the staircase, and we have to climb that staircase and ascend to God so that He will bless us and have favor with us. Jacob gets a vision and says, wait, no, God builds the staircase and it comes from heaven down to earth, and He just blesses us when I haven't even done anything right yet. When I've made a mess of things, this God just shows up and blesses me. And he's afraid. Why is he afraid? Because he thought that if he factored God out of his rebuilding project, he could rebuild the mess he made. He could atone for his own sins. He could take what he broke in his life and he could make it right, and everything would be just fine without God. But God shows up and everything in Jacob's life is laid bare before a holy God who sees all things. And he's blown away that this is how the gate of heaven works. That God builds a staircase from heaven to earth. Now, this wouldn't have fully made sense to Jacob, but when you look at the life of Jesus, suddenly, this is amazing and breathtaking. Well, let me tell you what happened in the life of Jesus. Centuries after Jacob, Jesus showed up and he began a ministry. And he begins calling disciples, saying, hey, you, come be my disciple. You're going to learn from me. You're going to follow me. You're going to follow me. Finds a guy named Philip, says, Philip, you're going to be my disciple. You're going to follow me. Philip says, Jesus, I got one question. Jesus is like, shoot. Can I bring a friend? Yeah, you can bring a friend. So Philip goes and gets his friend Nathaniel. Nathaniel, I found the Messiah. I found the Savior. I think he's the Son of God. You need to come check this out. Where is he from? Nazareth. Nathaniel says, God doesn't show up in places like Nazareth. He shows up in places like Jerusalem. He doesn't show up in the middle of nowhere like Nazareth. And Philip says, hey man, just come and see. All right. He says, I'll go see this Messiah that shows up in the middle of nowhere, comes to meet Jesus. Jesus sees him coming and says, hey, look at this guy. Here's a true Israelite. There's nothing false in him. Nathaniel looks at him, scratches his head and says, yeah, that's right. My friends all say I'm a straight shooter, but how do you know me? Jesus said, know you. I saw you while you were sitting under that fig tree. Nathaniel's eyes get wide as saucers. He says, you are the Son of God. You are the Savior of the world. I'll follow you wherever you go, Rabbi. Now, I've always wondered, what was Nathaniel doing under that fig tree that freaked him out like that when Jesus said, I saw you, he's like, uh-oh, I don't know. When I get to heaven, that's the first thing I'm going to ask him. But Jesus scolds him a little bit and says, Nathaniel, you believe too easily. You think that's amazing that I saw you under the fig tree? He says, no. Here's what's going to give you real reason to believe. This is how you're really going to encounter me. And everything's going to change. Look at what Jesus said in John chapter 1. Jesus said to Nathanael, you believe because I told you I saw you under the fig tree? You will see greater things than that. What's Nathanael going to see that's greater than that? He then added, very truly, I tell you, you will see, and he quotes, because he's quoting what we just read in Genesis, you will see heaven open, and the angels of God ascending and descending on, that's where the quote ends, and he changes the ending, not the staircase. Because Nathanael knew the story of Jacob, and he knew the story of the staircase, and the angels ascending and descending on the staircase. Jesus said, you're going to see the angels ascending and descending on the Son of Man. He's saying, Nathanael, do you know what you're going to see that's going to let you encounter God? You're going to see that I'm the staircase. I'm the staircase that came from heaven to earth. I am the bridge between heaven and earth. This is not like all your other religions that say you've got to climb your way into heaven. I came to be the gate into heaven for you. Heaven and earth intersect over my dead body, is what Jesus is saying to Nathanael. You will see that I am the staircase to heaven. And here's the most obvious fill in the blank I have ever had in my life. Jesus is the true stairway to heaven. Cue music. You see, we can see what Jacob could only speculate at, that this is about Jesus. He's the one who is at the top of the staircase, but he became the staircase. He didn't say, do these things and earn your way up into the presence of the gods. He said, I am your way into God's presence. Trust in me. Now the story continues back with Jacob. Early the next morning, Jacob took the stone he had placed under his head and set it up as a pillar and poured oil on top of it. He called that place Bethel. Bethel means the house of God, though the city used to be called Luz. Because it was so small, Luz was short for Loserville. Then Jacob made a vow saying, if God will be with me and will watch over me on this journey I am taking and will give me food to eat and clothes to wear, and so that I will return safely to my father's household, then the Lord will be my God, and this stone that I have set up as a pillar will be God's house. And if all that you give me, I will give you a tenth. Now, this is a big step for Jacob. He's still thinking in terms of contract. If God will, then I will. You know, some people come down hard on Jacob. I'm just glad he's taking this step. He sees that God intends to be faithful to him and bless him. And at least to his credit, he says, God, you get a tenth. I mean, we've seen the fulfillment of this. We've seen Jesus come and be the stairway to heaven, and we still struggle with that sometimes. He's like, if that's true, and by the way, what's he asking for? If God really gives me food, and really gives me clothes, and really gives me a safe journey, you get a tenth of all of it. You know, if you clean underwear, you get a tenth. I don't even know how that looks yet, God, but if you give me food and clothes and safe passage, I'm going to worship you. You're going to be my God. I'm going to give you a tenth. Now, Jacob gets this blessing from God. He gets this encounter from God. And what we're going to see in the weeks that follow is his life begins to change. Not all at once. He doesn't suddenly become a pious saint and does everything right. He still wrestles with his old Jacob self. It's going to be a process for the rest of his years to embrace the implications of meeting the God of grace. So do you. And so do I. But once we encounter Jesus and see that he is the stairway to heaven, that he came from heaven to earth, he showed up unexpectedly in the middle of nowhere to people like shepherds, and he shows up to you in places where you do not expect him, in messes that you have made in order to not condemn you, but to bless you, to forgive you, and call you to him. He did this for Jacob before he even repented, and he wants to do it for you too. That begins to change. And in our low places, in the messes we make, you know what we stop doing? Number one, we stop blaming God for the messes in our lives. We stop blaming him. Here's why. If God is really a covenantal God who came from heaven and earth to die for you and bless you forever, if that is your eternal destination, you cannot get angry with him when the journey there is bumpy at times. Some people say, if God were really God, he wouldn't let this happen. You're assuming that God is good enough and powerful enough and mighty enough to prevent whatever is happening from happening. If God, the God you believe in, is big enough and powerful enough and good enough and mighty enough to prevent what's happening from happening, that also means he is big enough and powerful enough and good enough to have reasons that you do not see from your perspective for letting this happen. if you are, it's natural to get angry at God. People come in, I'm a pastor, they say, Jason, I'm so angry at God. I get that. God can handle that. But if you're a person who stays angry at God, that shows either overwhelming pride or just a complete rejection of thinking through this logically. If he's big enough and good enough to stop what's happening from happening, he's big enough and good enough to have reasons you're just not going to see right now. And the reason why you're going through a hardship, we know what the reason isn't. The reason isn't because God is judging you or he's mad at you. He judged Jesus for you to welcome you into his presence. It takes away your ability to blame other people when your life is a mess. If your life is a mess and you are blaming someone else because your life is a mess, what you're saying is, God, I believe mortal man is more powerful than you and your sovereign will. I believe that mortal man can hijack your plans for the universe. God will do his will. In spite of many people's desire that he would not, he will do his will. What about blaming yourself? When you encounter God, you lose your ability to blame yourself as well. Because if God says you are forgiven, if God says I love you, if God says I know your sins, I know exactly how you made this mess, and I have chosen to forgive, who do you think you are to say you know better than God? It's incredibly, listen, if you beat yourself up when you've made a mess of things, and you just won't let it go, you are being so arrogant to think you matter more than God. And now you're going to go beat yourself up over that too. Oh, now I'm arrogant too. No. Listen. If you're ruminating on your mistakes, just stop it. Jesus is looking at you, standing over you, and he says, I know. I was there. I saw it. Yeah, I know you failed. I know you sinned. I paid for that sin too. I've got grace for you. Come on. Let me dust you off. Let's get back up. We'll get a fresh start. I'm not going to leave you. I'm not going to forsake you. I'm a covenant God. I'm not a contract God like, you blew it. Sorry, I can't bless you anymore. I'm a covenant God. I love you. I'm not forsaking you. You lose the right to blame yourself. You see, when you know who Jesus is, that he's the stairway, you lose your ability to blame God, to blame other people, and to blame yourself, but to simply live in awe and wonder at the grace of a covenantal God and the amazing future he has for you. In fact, I love what the New Testament author Paul says about this in 2 Timothy. He said this, if we are faithless, he remains faithful, for he cannot disown himself. If you're faithless, if you fail as you follow God, God remains faithful. Because when he promised, I will never leave you or forsake you, he's not disowning you when you fail. He's disowning himself and breaking his own word. And Paul says he can't do that. He won't do that. And that's the gospel. If you're new to Christianity, that's what we want you to know at Hope. That because of the unrelenting, unearned, unconditional grace and mercy of God, who loves you with a never-stopping love, you become humbled out of your arrogance. So that we no longer blame God, blame other people, blame ourselves. We're just thankful at how wonderful God is. So, when you've made a mess of things and it's at least partially your fault, stop blaming. Just run to him. Let me pray. Father, thank you for this the story of how you encountered Jacob and began to change his life. You do show up in unexpected places. You show up in unexpected ways. Thank you for your grace. I ask for the man or woman listening today where their life is a mess and it's partially their fault, that they would get a renewed sense of your wonder and your grace. So we would stop the blaming and start looking to you, finding our refuge in you, seeking you, because you are a God who heals, who forgives, who intercedes, who restores. That we would be laid bare before you, and that we would see you in this place. Give us the wisdom to know how to apply this and the courage to do it in Jesus' name. Amen.